I never liked field trips. Something about being taken out of my routine, packed into a bus with 40 other kids, and sent to some supposedly fun location made me uneasy. But the one trip that stuck with me the most, the one that still haunts me, was our overnight excursion to Hollow Campground. The trip was meant to be an immersive experience in nature. Our school had partnered with some outdoor education group that promised a weekend of team-building activities, survival skills, and good old-fashioned bonding time. The place was a vast stretch of wilderness with an old, abandoned ranger station and a lake that reflected the sky like a mirror. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it was the longest night of my life. From the moment we arrived, I felt off. The air carried an eerie stillness, the kind that made you lower your voice without realizing it. The instructors were cheerful enough, explaining the rules, assigning cabins, and planning our schedule. My group got the farthest cabin, right by the treeline, which everyone thought was cool. I didn't. As we settled in, my unease only grew. The first activity was a simple hike, but as we followed the trail, I noticed how quiet everything was. No birds, no rustling in the bushes, just our footsteps crunching on dried leaves. One of the instructors joked that we should be grateful for the silence. I forced a laugh. That night, we built a fire and shared stories. Some kids tried scaring each other with ghost tales, but they didn't need to. Something about that place was enough to send chills down my spine. I remember looking out into the darkness beyond the flames, feeling like something was watching. When it was time for lights out, our group trudged back to our cabin. It was a simple wooden structure with 6 bunks, a single window, and an old metal door that creaked every time it moved. I took the top bunk nearest to the window, regretting it instantly. The glass was fogged from the cold outside, but I kept imagining shapes beyond it. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first, just a sudden jolt from deep sleep. Then I heard it, a sound, a low, deliberate scratching against the cabin wall. I held my breath, listening. The others were asleep, their breathing deep and even. I thought I was imagining things until it happened again. A slow, dragging scrape, like someone tracing their nails against the wood. I wanted to wake someone up, but I couldn't move. I just lay there, paralyzed, listening to that sound. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. After what felt like hours, the scratching stopped. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, until exhaustion took over. The next morning, I checked outside, half expecting to see claw marks, but there was nothing. I convinced myself it had been the wind or a tree branch. But that night, it happened again. The same slow, deliberate scraping. Only this time, it moved. It started at the far side of the cabin and worked its way around, stopping just beneath my window. Couldn't breathe. I told myself it was an animal, but no animal moves with such patience. When I finally gathered the courage to peek out, the fog on the glass made it impossible to see clearly. But I swear I saw a shape. I barely slept. The next day, I told one of the instructors. He dismissed it as nerves, saying the mind played tricks in the dark. I almost believed him, until the third night. This time, the sound wasn't scratching. It was tapping. 3 slow, deliberate taps against the wood. I clamped my eyes shut, praying it would stop. Then, ever so faintly, I heard something worse. A whisper. Not words, just the unmistakable sound of breath against the wood. I don't remember how I fell asleep, but the next morning, I found something outside our cabin. A single footprint. Not from a shoe, not from an animal. Just the imprint of a bare foot, half covered by fallen leaves. We left that afternoon, and I never looked back. Years later, I looked up the history of Hollow Campground. I expected ghost stories, urban legends, something to explain what happened. Instead, I found a police report. Decades ago, a man had gone missing in those woods. A camper who had wandered away from his group. They never found him, only his tent, slashed open from the inside. The field trip to the Whitmore Historical Museum was supposed to be an ordinary school excursion, filled with yawns and half-hearted note-taking. I had little interest in artifacts and ancient relics, but attendance was mandatory. The teachers insisted it would be an immersive experience, though none of us expected just how true that would become. The museum itself was an imposing structure, its Gothic architecture reminiscent of a forgotten era. Inside, grand halls stretched endlessly, their dim lighting casting eerie shadows across the exhibits. Our tour guide, an elderly woman with a brittle voice and distant eyes, led us through each room with rehearsed explanations. I paid little attention until we reached the Hall of Vanished Civilizations. This exhibit was dedicated to settlements that had mysteriously disappeared, entire populations wiped from history with no clear explanation. The walls were lined with photographs of abandoned villages, artifacts from lost cultures, and diaries filled with unfinished entries. At the center of the room stood a glass case containing a single, yellowed map with red ink scrawled over its surface. Something about the map unsettled me. The markings appeared almost fresh, as if someone had added them recently. As the group moved on, I remained behind, staring at it. That's when I noticed something strange. The glass case had a small latch and it was unlocked. I turned to call the guide, but when I looked back, the map was gone. A chill crawled down my spine. I scanned the room, half expecting to see someone playing a prank, but my classmates were already in the next hall. The guide, too, had disappeared. For a moment, I was entirely alone, the dim lighting making the air feel thick. I hurried to catch up, my heart pounding. When I rejoined the group, nobody seemed to notice my absence. The guide continued her lecture as if nothing had happened. I tried to shake off the unease, convincing myself that the map had never really been there. Maybe it was just my imagination. But then, things got worse. As we moved deeper into the museum, the halls began to feel different. I couldn't place it at first. The paintings on the walls, the statues in the corners, had they always been looking in our direction? I didn't remember that particular sculpture standing so close. The air smelled stale, as if no one had set foot here in decades. Then, another student went missing. A girl named Emily, who had been right beside me minutes earlier, was suddenly gone. One of the teachers called her name, but there was no response. The guide assured us she had likely wandered into another exhibit, yet there was no sign of her. We split into small groups to search, our voices echoing off the high ceilings. I found myself back in the Hall of Vanished Civilizations. The map was there again, right where it had been before. Only now it was different. A new mark had been added. A fresh red line traced a path through an unfamiliar landscape, ending at a small X, and beneath it, scrawled in faint handwriting, was a name. Emily. Panic surged through me. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a display case. I turned to run, to find someone, but the hallway behind me was gone. Instead of the familiar path back to the entrance, there was only darkness stretching infinitely. My breath came in short gasps as I turned in circles, trying to orient myself. My group was gone. The museum was no longer a collection of halls and exhibits. It had twisted into something else entirely. The doors I had walked through moments ago no longer led where they should. I was trapped. I don't remember how long I wandered. The museum seemed endless, shifting each time I turned a corner. At one point, I saw movement in the distance, figures watching from the shadows. I called out, but they never answered. They just stood there, silent. Then I heard it. A whisper, just behind me. A voice I recognized. Emily's. I spun around, but the hall was empty. Only the map remained, the red ink still fresh, now with another name beside hers. Mine. I staggered to my feet, searching for Emily, but she was nowhere to be found. The teachers insisted she had never been on the trip. Her name wasn't on the attendance list. Nobody remembered her, but I do. When our teacher announced that our next field trip would be to the old Ridgeway quarry, most of us groaned. A dusty, abandoned excavation site hardly seemed like an exciting place to spend the day. Still, the school insisted it would be an educational experience, and we had no choice but to go. The bus ride was long, and the closer we got, the more isolated the surroundings became. The quarry was located far outside town, surrounded by dense forest and steep rock formations. As we arrived, a chill ran through me. The place felt empty, too quiet. The only sound was the occasional gust of wind rustling through the trees. A local geologist greeted us at the entrance, a wiry man with sun-leathered skin and a deep voice. He led us through the site, explaining how the quarry had once provided stone for half the buildings in our town. He pointed out the deep cuts in the rock walls, the massive slabs left behind, and the heavy machinery that had been abandoned decades ago. As he spoke, my eyes wandered. Something about the quarry made me uneasy. The rock formations jutted out at odd angles, casting strange, elongated shadows. I thought I saw something move near one of the deeper pits, but when I looked again, there was nothing. We were told to explore in small groups, to take notes on the rock compositions and sketch our surroundings. My friends and I wandered toward a set of rusted tracks that once carried carts of stone out of the pit. The tracks led to a tunnel entrance, marked with a weathered sign that read, "Keep out." One of my friends joked that we should go inside, just for a minute. I hesitated. Something about the tunnel felt wrong. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing the daylight just a few feet in. But before I could argue, he had already stepped in. I followed just to keep him from doing anything stupid. The air inside was stale, carrying the scent of damp earth and rust. Our footsteps echoed off the stone walls. A few feet in, we found an old mining cart tipped on its side, tools scattered around it. It looked as if the workers had left in a hurry. Then we heard it, a faint scraping sound, further down the tunnel. We froze. My heart pounded. The sound came again, closer this time. I whispered that we should leave, but my friend was already moving forward, flashlight in hand. The beam of light flickered as if struggling against the darkness. He called out, asking if someone was there. No answer. Then the ground beneath us shifted. A low rumble echoed through the tunnel, and suddenly, dust and small rocks rained from the ceiling. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my friend's arm and yanked him backward just as a loud crack split the air. We ran. The tunnel shook behind us, and a cloud of dust billowed out as we stumbled into the open air, coughing and gasping. The others ran toward us, asking what had happened. We turned back to the tunnel entrance. It had collapsed. Our teacher rushed over, the geologist in tow. When we explained what happened, he paled. He said the tunnels had been deemed unstable years ago, that we were lucky to have made it out.